Hello and welcome to episode 34 of Not Reserving Judgment, a podcast about the latest intrigues, triumphs, and outrages in Canadian constitutional law. I'm Josh DeHaas, counsel with the Canadian Constitution Foundation.
I'm Christine Van Gyn, the CCF's litigation director.
And I'm Joanna Barron, executive director of the CCF. In today's episode, I will tell you about a new proposed Quebec law that creates special protections for politicians facing mean constituents.
And I'll update you on some of the interesting ideas we heard and discussed at the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference in Ottawa last week.
And we'll share our bad legal takes of the week, where we take a light-hearted look at some legal opinions that didn't quite land. But first, I'm going to tell you why I think the Governor General needs to go. And I know that's a bold statement, and it's just my view. It's not the CCF's, but I think the Governor General has done so much damage to a really important institution that it's probably time to send her packing. And I feel like for $362,800 a year plus $38,000 clothing allowance, we can probably find someone who can do the job better. So before I get into why she has me so agitated, I want to explain why the Governor General is so important to our constitutional structure. I think most listeners know that the Governor General is the King's representative in Canada and that she carries out the formal day-to-day functions of the head of state on his behalf, including signing bills into law. But I think a lot of people just assume the monarchy is sort of a vestige. And that's kind of what I used to think before I listened to this podcast by called The Curious Task from the Institute for Liberal Studies. And they interviewed an interesting guy called Victor Muniz Fraticelli. And he is a Puerto Rican Canadian, and so he had to think about monarchy a lot when he became a citizen, and he was asked to swear an oath to Queen Elizabeth. And he started from the position that a lot of classical liberals hold, which is that it's kind of absurd in democracy in the 21st century to swear an oath to a king or a queen, and it's even more absurd to choose your head of state based on heredity. But he came around to seeing the value of the monarchy, and he's kind of converted me to a monarchist. Him plus the fact that Queen Elizabeth was, such a good role model for British and Canadian values. And the main value of the monarchy, according to Muniz Fraticelli, is that the monarchy allows us to separate the government of the day, which is ephemeral and has to be replaced from time to time, from the state, which is an enduring institution with a history and a future that will continue regardless of who is in power today. And he also says having a state represented by a family gives us something to aim our nationalistic attention and affection toward. And, we all love a leader. And if it weren't like the king or queen that we were focusing our affection on, it might be the elected, president or prime minister. And then if we fall too much in love with them, we might want them to stay forever. And that can lead to dictatorships. And it's not just the intangible justifications that matter here. The monarchy does retain some extremely important substantive functions that help to ensure the continuance of the state. And that's where I think Mary Simon is really, putting things at risk. I think she's really falling down her fundamental duties here, and that's because she keeps engaging in partisanship. So Her Excellency's biggest duty, if you ask me, is to ensure that there's like a transition of power from one government to another government, and that happens peacefully if the party in power loses the confidence of the people's elected representatives. And this doesn't happen often, this kind of scenario, but it is possible. So, for example, in the next election, let's say the Trudeau Liberals get 120 seats and the NDP get 30. Add that up, and the de facto current governing coalition has 150 seats. Let's say in that same election, the Conservatives only win 145. So they're the biggest party in the Commons, but less than the NDP and the Liberals combined, and nowhere near a majority because there's also, Bloc and Green MPs. So in that scenario, Justin Trudeau might ask Mary Simon to continue to govern, and she'd have to decide whether to allow him to continue to govern or to let the Conservatives try to govern. And if she chooses the NDP Liberal coalition, I think many people, and me included, would assume that this is a decision she made because she's partisan, and that's a really big problem. The conservatives would be, justifiably angry and probably quite unable to accept that result, and it would be like a real constitutional crisis. So that's just one of the reasons why I think, last week's performance is so inappropriate. And for those who don't know yet what I'm talking about, Simon hosted a symposium on online harms, which is one of the most contentious political issues of the day. And it's quite clear from not only her choice of topic, but her guest list that she is someone who believes online speech should be much more heavily regulated. And that's something that the Liberal NDP coalition agrees with, but not something that the Conservatives agree with, which is why this makes it so obviously partisan. And the Conservatives disagree for good reason. We've talked about this lots on the podcast before, but as much as we don't like seeing, nasty or abusive comments online, what counts as nasty or abusive or hateful is often in the eye of the beholder. And when you put like the government in charge of deciding what speech should be allowed, that doesn't tend to end well historically. It usually ends with the government, shutting down the speech of their political opponents and preventing us from having robust debate on issues that we need to be able to discuss. So as for the guest list, this colloquium was, basically a who's who of some of the most ardent supporters of the NDP liberal position on this. It's people like Rachel Gilmore, who I find to be one of the sort of nastiest people on the internet. She's sort of funded by this group called Check My Ads, who are affiliated with a lot of, big sort of Democratic donors in the US, and they supposedly fight misinformation, but she often puts a lot of misinformation out there herself. It also included ex CTV national news host Lisa LaFlamme. Sorry, I'm like all thrown off by your interruption there, Joanna.
Sorry, just forget about it. You're not going to cut this out. Just go.
No, I'm going to cut it out. So ex Lisa. So where should I start with that? Yeah. Also, there was ex CTV national news host Lisa LaFlamme, and yes, she's the woman who claims she was pushed out of CTV because of misogyny after she let her hair go gray, when the more likely reason that she was pushed out was because she was overseeing a failing news show. The most famous COVID authoritarians, including Chief Public Health Officer Theresa Tam, Bonnie Henry from BC, and Ottawa school trustee Nilly Kaplan-Mirth were there. These were people who repeatedly, were wrong about COVID and wanted to make it impossible for people to question their authority on that. They now, of course, support this bill that would, shut down speech online. And Faye Johnstone was there. She's Canada's most prominent transgender activist, and she has a history of hateful comments herself, often towards women who disagree with her on gender issues. And worst of all, the minister who's pushing the Online Harms Act, Arif Virani, was there trying to benefit from the taxpayer-funded publicity that Mary Simon has decided to provide to the Liberals and the NDP. And it looks like she only invited, pro-censorship people, but it's kind of hard to tell because Rito Hall has not responded to media requests from Blacklock's reporter, which is following this pretty closely. And you might think it's possible that Simon is like so ensconced in the Ottawa bubble that she can't see what's wrong with what she did, but I actually suspect she's aware that she did this, and maybe she even did this on purpose because she doesn't really care. And I say that because she's done this before. Like last fall, she fully endorsed the idea of residential school denialism, which is, again, a partisan political claim. And it's something before Parliament because the NDP have officially said they want to ban it. And the Liberals have also proposed banning denialism. Well, the Conservatives, I don't think, even agree that denialism is necessarily a thing. And so this just fits a pattern for me, Simon getting caught doing bad things and then doubling down because she's done that for years with her expenses. Blacklock's reporter and the Canadian Taxpayers Federation have been documenting for years that she spends large amounts of taxpayer money and doesn't seem to care all that much. For example, she billed $90,000 to visit her hometown. She awarded a sole sourced contract of $96,000 to a CBC pundit to work as a quote reconciliation consultant. She spent $93,000 on in-flight catering for a trip to Dubai, which was 46 people, but that didn't include drinks, and it does work out to like hundreds of dollars per person for airplane food. And then there was the $17.5 million spent on the Frankfurt Book Fair, which included $800,000 just for her appearance. And I feel like you could do a lot for Canadian authors with, $18 million other than just going to Germany to promote them. So needless to say, I think Simon's shown a total disrespect for Canadians and that this fits a pattern and that, in my personal opinion, it's time for her to resign. Um, what do you think? Joanna, what's your response?
I mean, you kind of said it all, but I was looking this morning. I don't know when he tweeted this. Oh, so he tweeted last night. Michael Spratt, who is an Ottawa criminal defense lawyer. Nothing against him personally. I was on a panel with him on the agenda a couple of weeks ago, and he retweeted Jamie Sarkonak from the National Post. Maybe we'll link it. She had a column about how this symposium was unbefitting of the Governor General's office. And his response was, what a trash piece, an absolute garbage take. However, Philippe Lagacé, who's kind of acknowledged as like the leading expert on the role of the Crown in Canada, had a piece where he agreed that, yes, this is inappropriate. This is partisanship. So I'm not really sure what Spratt is so worked up about. The problem is that there's like very little political will, and I don't think there will even be any political will in the event of a change of government to turf Mary Simon. People just don't care that much, and people don't really clock why this is so harmful to our constitutional monarchy. And I agree with your comments, by the way. I would like to hear what Christine has to say about this, because I know she's a bit of an anti-monarchist. And Victor Muniz
Are you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I'll just make my case. So first of all, Muniz Fraticelli is brilliant. He's cross-appointed in political science and law, and he's a brilliant political theorist. But I think Ben Woodfindon, who now works for Poilievre, but was formerly a McGill academic, also had a similar thrust that like you need something to elevate you over mere partisanship. That's very important for like a healthy civic democracy. And yeah, I mean, it's a little expensive and nobody particularly likes King Charles, but well, I'm not going to say anything more about that, but hopefully within our lifetime, it won't be King Charles. But anyways, I think the monarchy is time tested. And I think just, it just seems kind of trashy to have a pure Republican democracy. Christine, why do you hate the monarchy so much?
Because I'm trashy. I don't know. I think the monarchy is just like British version of celebrity culture. And I just don't care about these people and their inbred ways and their
excuse me,
different
you read
problems.
Spare, so you do care about these.
Hey, look, I do actually. So I do enjoy celebrity culture, but I just don't want to be governed by Kim Kardashian. Like, all respect to Kim Kardashian.
Excuse me, did you just put Queen Elizabeth II in the same category as Kim effing Kardashian? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I did. Well, I'll put
Show some respect. Put some respect on her name.
I'll put Charles in the same category with his weird, salacious scandal from whenever it was, the 80s, with Camilla and all their drums. Oh gosh, I don't want to. We're going to be talking about tampons later on in this podcast, so I'll just leave it there.
Do we have to?
Too much estrogen on the pod, Josh. So
that was the most disgusting celebrity scandal of all time.
Exactly. There you go. Kim Kardashian would never stoop so low. She has higher standards. So I'm not into the monarchy. I don't need to be governed by unattractive British celebrities. I don't buy into the whole thing that having a monarchy somehow makes us better. I don't care about the Governor General. I think if you did a poll of most Canadians, they would not know who the Governor General is or what she does. And I'm just over it. I don't think that it's a reasonable thing to think that we can actually get rid of this position in any simple way. it's almost impossible. I think the job of the governor general is to show up at ceremonial events and not be noticed as much as possible. All of these stories about the governor general attract way too much attention. She spends an inordinate amount of money. We've just had one after another of disastrous governor generals. The last one had her whole bullying scandal. Everything I learn about the governor general, I learn against my will. I do not want to hear any stories about any of these people. And I, on the issue of is this partisan or not, she invited the justice minister. Like, give me a break. Anyone who's saying this is not partisan, there's nothing wrong with this, when she's in, the people that she invited to this event are hyper polarizing, like Rachel Gilmore, who, yes, she does get a lot of online hate, but she's an incredibly polarizing person to invite to this symposium. It is not a neutral thing to invite Rachel Gilmore. It is not a neutral thing to invite the justice minister who's pushing legislation on this very topic. So I don't like the monarchy. I don't like the governor general. I don't like Bill C-63. And this is like the perfect storm of all of those things that I don't like. I'll move on to my news headline now, which is a little bit more cheerful. I'm just going to give a really short recap of what we all did last week. Josh, Joanna, and I, we all went to Ottawa, Joanna's favorite city in Canada.
Speaking of hating, yeah.
So we all went to Ottawa to go to the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference. And this is a conference that I have been going to. I think I went almost every year since it first started back in, I think it was 2007. I went to the first one. Back then, it was called the Manning Networking Conference. It was started by Preston Manning, who is one of my absolute favorite people in Canadian politics. He's just the nicest guy ever. He is so thoughtful. He is so generous with his time. And he wrote the foreword to the book that Joanna and I wrote, Pandemic Panic. So just all love for Preston. And I love going to this conference. And this year, we got a booth. The Canadian Constitution Foundation had a booth set up at the entrance to the conference. And we had a really great year with our Emergencies Act victory, with a lot of our cases just getting a lot of attention, a lot of victories, a lot of growth within the organization. So we wanted to have a central place at the conference so people could come and talk to us. And they really did. We had also made these posters, sort of photo props so that people would be lured over to our booth to talk to us, attracted by these jazzy posters. They said
they're definitely not going to be attracted by our mugs.
I still have my mug from previous years.
I know. I mean, like our faces.
Oh, I thought you meant because one year the CCF booth sold coffee mugs. So people did like the coffee mugs too. But people liked these signs. They said things like free speech is good and sort of, Marvel comic letters. There was a sign that said, hey, government, leave me alone. And people did like coming over and taking photos with these signs. And we were also selling our book, which is always, of course, so popular. And we got to announce at the conference, they announced over the lunch that we'd be doing a book signing because our book has been shortlisted for the Donner Prize, which is the most prestigious prize for public policy writing in Canada. It is a really big deal. It is a $60,000 award, and it is the top prize for policy writing. And so we're ecstatic, and we got to announce that, and a lot of people came over to congratulate us. So, of course, there's the agenda for the conference. I didn't make all of the sessions because I was in our booth chatting with supporters for a big part of the conference, but I will tell you about some of the highlights for me, and maybe Josh and Joanna, you guys can chime in with your views on some of this. I'll ask you about some of the things you thought about. So one of the big draws for people was conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Honestly, I've seen so many political speeches that it's kind of hard for me to get excited about them. And this was not that different for me, to be honest. It was not his typical stump speech. It was a bit more intellectual, a little more professorial than his usual speech. But I did think the crowd was a little bit muted. I was also super hungry, so
Hmm.
maybe that tainted my view. But Josh, you said that you really liked it. You were really into the speech. What did you like about Poilievre's speech at the conference?
Yeah, well, speaking of Ben Woodfinden before, I don't know if he had anything to do with this particular speech, but I could tell that, someone who knows their history was trying to
Mhm.
weave some of that sort of tradition and talking about like how Canada in the past was, such a great country and that we were really united about a lot of things. That was part of the speech that I liked. So, for example, they had, or Pierre told a story about how Diefenbaker, when he was a little boy, sold a newspaper in, I think it was Saskatoon, to Laurier, who was prime minister at the time, and Diefenbaker, was chatting with the prime minister, and it was one of those photo ops that was in the newspaper, and Diefenbaker basically told him like, stop talking to me, old man. I have to get back to selling newspapers, and just this cute story about how, um, Diefenbaker, through hard work, went on to become prime minister, and Laurier, who's a Quebecois person, who's a liberal, and Diefenbaker, who's a conservative, they actually had a lot of Canadian values in common. And Poilievre was saying that was sort of there was a Canadian consensus about things like being small, C conservative when it comes to spending that carried through right from the Laurier era to the sort of Chrétien Martin era, and also just in terms of liberalism, like the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party have shared a lot of classical liberal values like free expression, and those were sort of part of the Canadian consensus for most of the country's history. And what we've seen with Trudeau, in Poilievre's view, and I think he's right, is something completely different, where we're sort of abandoning a lot of classical liberal values and also the fiscal conservatism that united so many Canadians from both of the major parties for so long. So I just thought it was really interesting because you talk to a lot of liberals today and they're like, they feel like the party has that their party, the Liberal Party, the one that they've voted for many years, has abandoned them in a lot of ways. And I think Poilievre is saying like, vote for me, and I'm the guy who can unite us again around those principles. So,
Yeah, I think one of his lines was Pierre Trudeau or Justin Trudeau is not a liberal. Stop calling him a liberal. And that he kind of hearkening back to the ideas of classical liberalism. Um, let me talk about some of the other things that I enjoyed about the conference, some of the other speakers. Um, I think probably my favorite was a speech by an Israeli politician and former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. And he talked, his was a surprise speech because they didn't want to give, advance notice that Israeli was in Ottawa because it would attract protesters. And ultimately it did attract protesters, but they were kept outside. So Bennett talked about October 7th and some of the details of it, which I still really struggle to hear. He talked about all the text messages that he actually received from people living on kibbutzes in southern Israel on the morning of October 7th, and the slow response of the IDF, which is a story that is widely known within Israel, but I think a lot of people outside of Israel are not aware of the terrible delay that led to this massacre going on for as long as it did. Bennett also talked about his background as a tech entrepreneur and his military service, and he talked about the war against Hamas and how Hamas has absolutely perfected the strategy of attacking civilians and then going to hide among their own civilians, using them as human shields, and how this is not a morally tolerable strategy. I was surprised that protesters did not get in because there was a protester during Pierre Poilievre's speech. It was very unclear to most people what that protester was upset about because it was,
fire the liar.
yeah,
That's
it
what they
just
were
said
screaming, and we're
fire
like,
the
"Are
liar,
you?"
but no one could see what they were upset about.
Yeah, was it a climate change thing?
Who knows?
Someone said the rumor was they were
Ineffective.
the rumor was
Ineffective.
climate change, but it could have been trans, it could have been Israel. Screaming "fire the liar" doesn't really
Yeah, if I don't
tell
know
us much.
what you're mad about, like you did a bad job. Um, but none of the Palestinian protesters got into the conference. So maybe they increased the security following that.
They did scream at me and Ginny Roth when we were walking past, and Paige McPherson. They were like, F you. And from what I could tell, because none of us were like wearing badges or anything, the only reason they identified us as people they hated is because we were like dressed in business attire and looked like we had jobs. Like we could have been just guests of the Westin Hotel, and they were like literally like, F you. And Ginny Roth gave them the finger. I was surprised by just the animus. It was maybe like 30 people, but they were really just like, they were so angry.
I mean, yeah, I'm happy they didn't make it in, because I think that Bennett's presentation was probably my favorite. There was another one that I really liked. It was a presentation by Sohrab Amari, who is a media personality, an author, former editor of the New York Post. If I had one question, this is like a really stupid question, but if I had one question for him, it would be, what is the process for coming up with the headlines for the New York Post? Because they have the best headlines and cover pages, but that is not what he talked about. He had a conversation with the newly elected conservative MP, Jamil Javani, and they talked about the sort of changing demographic of the right of center movement, including the growth of the working class sector in the conservative movement, and the growth of unionized workers within the movement, and how powerful corporations abuse their power, and how the conservative movement needs a different response to corporatism, and that, you know, conservatives are typically seen as being pro-corporate, but we should be skeptical of power, including corporate power. I really want to read his book now. I think that this is a really different perspective for most of what we got at the conference, and it's a really important one that is kind of rising with the perhaps rise of populism in the right. So I'm really interested in the book. Now, the last thing I'll say is that simultaneously alongside the Canada Strong and Free conference is another conference that takes place next door at another organization called Cardis. And their conference runs at the same time, and it's called the Cardis Exchange. It's a little more philosophical, a little more theoretical. And actually, Joanna, you presented at the Cardis Exchange. I loved your presentation. It had a big focus on religious diversity and viewpoint diversity. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what your talk was about.
Yeah, well, we talked about pluralism in the public square and sort of the limits of pluralism. And I was on a panel with Harrison Lowman, who's my editor at The Hub, Ray Pennings, is he a senior VP at Cardis? Such a wonderful person, Ray. Reverend Andrew Bennett.
Deacon. I thought he was a deacon. Josh and I were discussing this at length.
He has like the priest collar thing.
The Roman collar, yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, we talked about basically what are the limits of pluralism? And I would say that the deacon was probably the most pro-pluralism, that we can totally disagree about like what life is about and what happens when we die, and still just like happily live side by side. I think I was more of the pessimistic note that there are limits, and we do have to think about our first principles when we literally are living side by side in Canada with people whose raison d'etre is to destroy a free society. And
you literally walked past them.
I literally did,
you.
And I have to say, well, and that's a bit of a more marginal case, because, you know, they could in their heads just think they're standing up for human rights and protesting civilian loss of life. But then this weekend, so on Saturday, we came home, and we had footage from Kareem Assad of a pro-Palestine protest that looked like it was happening in front of Scotia Plaza in downtown Toronto. Protest, and then somebody announced on a loudspeaker, just to announce this breaking news: the Islamic Republic of Iran has sent drones and missiles to Israel. And people start screaming. They're so happy, jubilantly cheering. So that's kind of, I would say,
like end of the world stuff that they're celebrating.
Point on my side that maybe we can't just sit and sing Kumbaya when people are literally cheering for escalation between two nuclear powers. But anyways, it was a fun discussion. And there was a talk from Jason Kenney at Cardis, which I missed. There was a panel with Howard Anglin, my former boss, brilliant writer. They talked about MAID and housing crisis. Overall, my distaste for Ottawa, which is well documented, was overcome by the company of you fine people and the conversations we had. And also our board chairman, Andy Crooks, received an award recognizing his service to the liberty movement in Canada. So
yeah, the Cliff Friars Award, which is given to people who are involved in the right of center movement, but they're kind of not public personas. So it's a really important way of paying homage to someone who's done a lot, but doesn't claim the spotlight the way we all do. So that's my update. I encourage everyone who's listening to come to the conference next year. It's such a fun event and a great opportunity to hear new ideas, talk about policy, and to connect with other people. And if you do come next year, be sure to come by and say hi to us at our booth. So I'll throw now to Joanna. What's your update?
So I want to talk very briefly about a new proposed law out of Quebec. This was announced on Monday by the Municipal Affairs Minister, André Laforêt, who tabled a bill in the National Assembly that would impose fines for making politicians, quote unquote, worry for their safety. So this legislation, called Bill 57, would give police the power to impose a fine of up to $500 to anyone who disrupts a city council meeting with disorderly conduct, a person who intimidates, threatens, or harasses a municipal or provincial politician in a way that prevents them from doing their job or makes them worry for their safety, would face these fines. And sorry, it's actually up to $1,500. And this bill would also authorize politicians that are subject to comments that, quote unquote, unduly hinder the exercise of their functions or invade their privacy to apply to the Superior Court for an injunction, which, by the way, they can already do. But Laforêt says this is necessary because this will allow the matter of these politicians who are so traumatized by mean members of the public to be treated on a more urgent basis. And when questioned about whether this bill could be used, the elephant in the room is that it could be used to muzzle political opposition. Laforêt says, no, I'm not worried about that at all. This is designed to stop threatening behavior. And what we want is to stop situations that persist, threatening comments, violent comments. So it's important to note here that the criminal code already has laws against making threats. So uttering threats is criminal, and also criminal harassment, section 264 sub 1. No person shall, without lawful authority, engage in conduct that causes another person to reasonably fear for their safety or anyone known to them. So this is a redundant law. I suppose usually when governments do this, it's to make some type of symbolic comment and have a deterrent effect, but where something is literally already criminalized, I don't think it's wise or justified or concomitant with principles of the rule of law to just bring in a new law to beat somebody over the head with it. It clearly is going to silence political opposition. And my hot take is that being a politician means opening yourself up on some level to a level of annoyance or inconvenience, not fear for your safety, of course. That's something that's criminalized, but you're opening yourself up to being more annoyed than the general population because democracy is messy and annoying, and people are going to say things to you, including your constituents, that might be mean, that might not be the nicest things. So, yeah, bad. This is like a classic Quebec bad legal take. It will probably pass, but I think it's a very bad idea. What do you think, Josh?
I think Mary Simon would like it. She would approve. Why do we need more laws for everything? Like there's this trend in Canada over the past like 3 to 5 years where, there are clearly problems. Like people are too threatening to politicians sometimes, but rather than just calling the police and having them use either their common law powers or enforcing the criminal law, they decide they need to write some new statute or bylaw. Like stop it. Like let's just enforce the laws we have before we create new ones. Christine, what do you think?
I would just say I don't want to downplay too much that politicians do receive really appalling comments. I saw a post yesterday from a politician in Alberta who got up and talked about how he's an Indigenous politician, and people said he should be scalped. And someone wrote that they want to see him through the eyes of a scope. And I mean, that's scary. That's really scary. It's really bad. And I do think we need to condemn that kind of thing. I don't want to downplay it. I also think it is covered by existing criminal code provisions. The law should be enforced. We don't need new laws when the police aren't enforcing the laws that we already have. So, I mean, take these threats seriously when they are serious threats, and there are some. And when they aren't serious threats, like I saw another post yesterday about someone said CBC reporter Ian Hannah-Mansing had harassed them because he sent them a message, a DM that said, why don't you like, they wrote like, Ian Hannah-Mansing sucks. He's a bad host of Cross Country Checkup. And they said, I can't listen to Cross Country Checkup anymore because of Ian Hannah-Mansing. And he wrote them a DM and said, you said that you can't watch it because of me. Wow. Why did you feel the need to share that? And they said, oh, Ian Hannah-Mansing's harassing me. And like, not everything is harassment. Not everything needs to be called harassment. Some people just need a thicker skin, like these, like probably Ian Hannah-Mansing too. Like, what do you care what some random on Twitter thinks of Cross Country Checkup? So he probably needs a thicker skin. This person who said him complaining it's harassment. That person needs a thicker skin. And to the extent that there are actual criminal threats of violence, like obviously enforce the law. So that's my reaction. We don't need a new law. Police should just enforce the law that we have. Why don't we take a break now, and then we'll go to our bad legal takes.
Okay, yeah, before we get into our bad legal takes, I just want to say I worked briefly with Ian Hannah-Mansing. I don't know how anyone could not like him. He's so good at what he does and such a nice guy.
I don't, sorry, was that mean to Ian Hannah-Mansing? I think he
No,
could
not at all.
he
No,
could
I
probably
just
use a
I
thicker
think
skin, but
fair. We all could at
yeah.
times. Okay, so my bad legal take goes to Vincent Wong, who is a part-time volunteer public relations officer for professor at the University of Windsor Law School. Obviously, that's a joke, but Wong is one of a handful of professors who, weirdly, for the past 6 months, have tweeted, streams and streams of tweets all day about how evil Israel is because it decided to defend itself from terrorists who killed 1,200 people and took hundreds hostage on October 7th. Wong's latest tweet is in response to the news that mischief and some other charges have been laid against a couple of prominent Toronto left-wing activists. Desmond Cole and Anna Lipman are two of them. And Wong tweeted that the arrests of these people show an outrageous criminalization of those taking part in anti-genocide and anti-occupation protests. And he adds that this is a massive incursion on our collective charter rights. Then he tags Toronto police, accusing them of selective policing, and he demands that Mayor Olivia Chow respond to this, quote, nauseating slide into fascism. Now, what he's upset about is that police charged people who entered a private office of an Israeli company with bullhorns, used the bullhorns to screech in the faces of the employees, and then refused to leave, claiming that they were going to, just stay and occupy this office. And obviously they taped this and put it on their social media. Wong tweeted that this is, somehow violating the charter. But, even a first-year law student can tell you that the charter doesn't apply to all spaces in all places. As explained in the 1991 Supreme Court case, Committee for the Commonwealth of Canada, you have to consider the historical or actual function of the place, and before you can determine whether it's somewhere where you'd expect free expression to be protected. And this plainly does not include private offices, and it also doesn't include a right to vandalize or harass people. And so this tweet is just crazy. The other absurd claim that he makes is that Palestinian protesters are somehow being singled out, but Well, it's true that most protesters who have marched or gathered over the past 6 months, including those who are on the side of the mullahs of Iran, haven't committed any crimes and they should be allowed to protest and march in the street. There have been lots of videos showing people committing obvious crimes like intimidation on the streets of Canada since October 7th. And in my view, the real problem is that police have been way too hesitant to lay down the law. And, I'm a strong believer in the right to protest, but you can't blockade roads, you can't vandalize, you can't do the things that are alleged to have been done in this case of, Desmond Cole and Anna Lipman. But the good news is last night in Toronto, there was a big protest on railway tracks. They tried to, blockade the railway, and Toronto police came and did their jobs, pushed the protesters off, and arrested a few of them. And there were also arrests earlier this week in Halifax, where 21 people were arrested for trying to blockade a road. And so I think police are finally starting to do their job, and they're not, singling out Palestinian protesters. They should have been enforcing the criminal laws from day one. So yes, the charter protects your right to march in the streets. It doesn't protect your right to go into public offices, screech at people, and occupy the space. So that's my bad legal take. Joanna, why don't you give us yours?
So my bad legal take of the week is that unfortunately very sad. We talked about MAID 2 weeks ago. This is again related to assisted dying. Background to this bad legal take is that we got news last week that a quadriplegic man who was left on a stretcher for 4 days and suffered horribly painful bed sores as a result had requested a medically assisted death. And so my bad legal take goes to André Pical, who is the health writer for the Globe and Mail, very mainstream, well-respected journalist in Canada. And his tweet says, when a person is in unbearable pain, they need the agency to end their pain. How they got to that point is another matter. As I said, the days on a stretcher causing bed sores was unconscionable, but you don't correct one injustice, poor care, with another injustice, denying MAID. A friend of mine, David Polanski, tweeted, this is probably what Hannah Arendt was talking about when she talked about the banality of evil, just like how normalized this type of comment becomes from a very mainstream journalist. So clearly the moral response of this situation is to focus on the original injustice, why somebody was left in unbearable pain on a stretcher, and somehow I'm very dubious that our healthcare system is going to be able to correct these ongoing injustices. Hallway healthcare is a well-known phenomenon and has been for at least 15 years. Instead of rushing to correct this original injustice with another even more severe indignity, which is that this man had severe pain caused by negligence of the state. So the acceptable corrective must be a lawful death at the hands of the state. No, this should be outside of the scope of vocabulary. The whole concern with assisted death is that people who are temporarily blinded by their, not to be minimized at all, agony, that it shouldn't be on the menu of options that, well, just kill yourself. So this is morally atrocious, André Pical. I am a longtime reader of your content, and I expect better of you. Christine, what's your bad legal take?
So mine's a little bit lighter. So
Thank
we'll
God.
finish on a lighter note. So mine this week goes to Press Progress, which is the online news outlet founded by the Broadbent Institute. So they had an article about a video posted to Twitter by Derek Fildebrandt. And Derek Fildebrandt is a right of center media personality. He's the publisher of the online news platform, The Western Standard. So I guess it's battling ideologically different online news sources. So Derek was in Ottawa for the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference, and I saw him there. I chatted with him briefly. I've known him since 2006. And he was flying out of Ottawa after the conference, and he went to the Ottawa airport and he visited the men's room before his flight. And in the washroom, Derek saw that there were free tampons and menstrual pads in a dispenser, which annoyed him. It actually annoys me also, having spent, my life buying things like this, and they are now being given away at taxpayer expense to men. So it's a little annoying to me, but okay. It definitely annoyed Derek. And so he took out his phone to film a video complaining about how ridiculous it is. And that video got about 3 million views. So he's, ranting about how dumb it is to have tampons in the men's room and how it's a waste of money and kind of making fun of it. Press Progress did not like this. And they had, in this article about Derek's video, they said that it could potentially bring charges of voyeurism under the criminal code. Now, this is a bad legal take. To be very clear, it could not. Voyeurism is covered in section 162 sub 1 of the criminal code. And the elements of the crime require that you surreptitiously observe or record a person and that they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Now, I do think that there's generally a reasonable expectation of privacy in the bathroom, but it probably depends on where in the bathroom you are, I guess. In this video, you could see people walking around in the background. You could see this, you could very briefly see someone's back at the urinal. So the urinal guy, maybe, some reasonable expectation of privacy. But as I said, his back was turned. He's not naked. But the other element, there is obviously no surreptitious filming. Hildebrandt is literally shouting into his phone, filming. The other element of the offense is that the recording is for the purpose of recording a person nude. And no, it was not for that purpose. There was nobody nude. It was the purpose of the video was to complain about tampons. The other element is that the surreptitious observation or filming is for a sexual purpose. Again, no, there was no sexual purpose. It was for the purposes of complaining. So it's a very bad legal take. And Press Progress interviewed criminal defense lawyer Michael Spratt, who I guess is popping up again in this podcast. And Spratt did confirm there are no hard and fast rules for where you can and cannot film, and that there's no absolute prohibition on filming in the bathroom, which is good news for me, since in my youth, I took many a photo with girlfriends in nightclub bathrooms, and I don't want to have to go to jail for that. Spratt does say it's not a good idea to film in a public bathroom because it could expose you to legal liabilities. I think, okay, that's a fair point. Maybe it could. In this situation, no. He doesn't say no, but he says it's context specific. I think the context here, no, it could not expose you to that liability. But then Spratt goes on to call Hildebrandt's video rage baiting, says that Hildebrandt's a grifter, that he's an idiot. So I do think that almost certainly Spratt is exaggerating the risk. And by calling Hildebrandt a rage baiter, an idiot, and a grifter, I think that is rage baiting also. So like, hey, pot is kettle, you're black. Like, this is also exaggerated, hyperbolic language that they're both engaging in here. So bad legal takes all around here.
Are we sure it was the men's washroom and not the all gender washroom with urinals? Because
Awkward run-in with that this week.
yeah. So just to clarify, at Massey College at U of T, they now have an all gender washroom and an all gender washroom with urinals. And surprise, surprise, the latter is full of men and the former is mostly women.
Yeah,
except for Joanna.
Except for a confused Joanna.
No, yeah. What happened was we were at a book event there this week, and I went to the restroom that said all gender with urinals, cracked open the door, and there were like 3 U of T law profs in their 70s. And I was just like, I have to go home. And Josh was like, no, you had to find the all gender washroom, not the all gender with urinals.
Lesson learned, 2024. All right, as usual, we hope you'll rate us, review, and subscribe. And I really do mean go rate us and review us now, because it really helps us with finding new listeners. And just a reminder, you can support our work by subscribing to the CCF's YouTube channel, by following us on Twitter, or by going to theccf.ca, where you can sign up for our new and improved Freedom Update newsletter. Thanks for listening.